The radio was still playing when Mira Calden got into the car. Hall and Oates. Something from the old century, needle-scratchy through a speaker that had seen better decades. The driver had the volume low, but in the silence of three people who didn't entirely trust each other, it was loud enough to fill every corner. She'd been doing this job for 11 years, and she'd never once expected to be fleeing for her life with a fakibben she'd tried to arrest less than a month ago sitting in the back seat, already asleep with her mouth open. Special Agent Mira Calden of the Interplanetary Security Directorate pressed her temple to the cool glass and watched the Connecticut country scroll past. Green and gold in the October light. Trees doing what trees do before everything dies. She hadn't taken this road in years. Maybe never. "You should rest," Yale said from the front seat. Yael was what you called him because you couldn't pronounce his actual name. He was one of those people you met only in the margins of disasters. The kind of person who materialized when things went sideways and disappeared just as quietly when they resolved. Dark skin, close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, always dressed like he'd grabbed his clothes off a floor that happened to have good taste. He had a thermos of coffee on the dashboard, 2 phones he hadn't touched in an hour, and a quality of stillness that unsettled Mira every time she noticed it. "I don't sleep in cars," Mira said. Noted. A pause. "Also, I'm taking the long way. The coastal highway goes through Harwick, and Harwick's got a relay station for the Vorath communication network, dense with their people. We stay off it." Mira looked at him sidelong. "You know which roads the Vorath have operatives on? I know a lot of things." He reached over and turned the radio up exactly 1 notch. The implication was clear. She turned back to the window. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the one hunting Dara Alden, the woman now snoring in the back seat. Dara was one of the last surviving hackers from the Meridian Collective, the underground network that had spent 4 years finding ways around the Vorath signal infrastructure. The surveillance lattice the alien conglomerates had spent a decade embedding in every city on the continent. They didn't own the hardware. They just owned the data that flowed through it. There was a distinction, and the distinction had gotten very slippery over time. The Vorath had arrived in the way that all genuinely powerful things arrive, slowly then all at once. No invasion fleet, no demands from orbit. Just money, then more money, then the kind of structural leverage that rewrites what a city looks like from the inside. They weren't here to conquer. That was the thing nobody had quite been ready to explain when they started. They were here to optimize. In Vorath philosophy, in the dense, recursive thought webs they generated through that bioluminescent nerve tissue bundled behind what passed for their eyes, the only real sin was inefficiency. An unmonitored population was an inefficient one. Ergo, a monitored population was an ethical act. They'd explained this at the UN in their own way. It had taken 11 hours and 3 rounds of translation matrices. The Meridian Collective had explained their own view considerably more succinctly by spending 3 years tunneling into the Vorath communication infrastructure and preparing, on a single day 6 weeks ago, to detonate it. Not literally, not with anything explosive, with money. The Vorath had been running an economic integration scheme called Echo Protocol, a parallel currency built into the communication network itself, pegged to human financial systems but floating separately, difficult to reverse, immune to traditional banking oversight. The collective had hijacked the redistribution layer, instead of the funds flowing upward, into Vorath holding structures, into the treaty-compliant shell corporations, into the 34 human enterprises that had signed exclusivity agreements and spent the last 7 years becoming enormously, catastrophically wealthy. It had gone sideways, outward, into every single enrolled account in the network, spread flat, 1 equal share per registered human user. 41 trillion credits redistributed in 17 seconds. You couldn't take it back. That was the beautiful and terrible thing Dara had designed. The Echo Protocol's own architecture prevented reversal. Mira had been in the building 2 blocks away, watching the feeds come in, when the notifications started going off on every phone in a 10-block radius. She'd been sent to detain the collective before they could execute. She'd arrived 4 minutes too late and spent the subsequent 12 minutes standing very still in a server room, watching her supervisor try to reach the deputy director and getting no answer, while outside in the plaza, ordinary people stared at their phones and started making noise. The kind of noise people make when something impossible has happened, and it happens to be good. She'd thought, in that moment, which she hadn't said out loud to anyone, good. It had gotten complicated after that. Now she had a new name on a new passport, Sergeant First Class Jenna Caro, U.S. Army currently on administrative leave, and she was in a car with a musician/government fixer named Yul, who apparently knew the Vorath communication network better than most of the people who'd built it. And they were taking Dara al-Dan to Boston to catch a flight to Lisbon. And after that, it was Dara's problem. Mira pressed her knuckle against her teeth and stared at Connecticut. The rest area was somewhere in Westport. A picnic table, a parking lot, a view of a gray and silver inlet that was, despite everything, genuinely beautiful. Mira stood at the railing while Dara sat on the table and pulled out a small rubberized device that looked like a modified phone and wasn't. "This it?" Mira asked. "Yeah." Dara looked at the device, then at the water, then at Mira. She had a hacker's eyes, the kind that were always processing, always finding angles, but there was something underneath that was just tired. They'd both been running on nothing for weeks. "You want to see it? I watched the whole thing happen in real time." "I know." A pause. "But do you want to see it happen again?" Mira thought about that. She thought about 11 years, about the briefings, about the maps showing the gradual expansion of Echo Protocol enrollment, about the phrase, treaty-compliant enterprise, and how it had started to mean something other than what it sounded like. She thought about the supervisor who'd sent her to stop this. "Yeah," she said, "sure." Dara flipped the screen open. It was a live data view, not a trigger, nothing dangerous anymore. The dangerous part was already done. Just a window into the redistribution flow. Numbers, still cascading. Transfer histories. Account confirmations. A small map that showed, in soft blue points of light, every location where a notification had been received and acknowledged. The continental United States was solid blue. "How many?" Mira said. 340 million enrolled accounts. Dara tilted the screen so Mira could see better. Give or take. Not everyone enrolled. But a lot of people enrolled because the Vorath had the municipal service integration. And if you wanted to pay a water bill or register a vehicle, you had to use the Echo interface. So, she shrugged. A lot of people who didn't entirely know what they were signing up for woke up this morning with about 120,000 credits. Mira was quiet for a moment. "That's not a number that changes anything permanently." "No," Dara said. "It's a number that changes how people think about what's permanent." Down on the inlet, a pair of birds were doing something complicated with the wind. Mira watched them. 120,000 credits was 3 months of rent in a city like Boston. It was 6 months of groceries. It was the thing that got you through a bad year or let you start a different kind of year. Or allowed you to tell a bad employer that you'd be fine. Actually, thank you, because you'd find something else. The Vorath had called it a criminal act against financial infrastructure. Dara had called it the greatest forced redistribution of wealth in human history. The birds came to rest on the railing, not far from where Mira was standing, and looked at her with the frank unconcern of creatures who had not been following the news. "Are you scared?" Mira said. "Of what?" "Of what they do next." Dara was quiet for a while. "I'm more scared of what I do next," she said finally. "I know what they do. They litigate. They sanction. They write strongly worded communications to government bodies. The Vorath aren't violent. Violence is inefficient." She closed the device. "What I do next is a blank page. That's actually scarier." "Is it?" Mira thought about the blank page quality of a new passport, a name like Jenna Caro, an airport, a flight to Lisbon. She thought about the last time she'd been someone's enemy, and the strange, sideways sensation of not being that anymore. In the car, Yale had turned the radio back up. Hall and Oates again, or still, she couldn't tell. The drive to Logan was 3 hours, and they spent most of it in comfortable silence, which surprised Mira. She'd expected it to be awkward. There was a lot of history between the seat she was in and the seat Dara was in. But Dara asleep again almost immediately, and Yale drove with the focused economy of someone who found the world more interesting than conversation, and Mira watched the landscape change. At one point Yale said, "The thing about a new name is, it isn't the name that has to change." "You're philosophical at 3 in the afternoon," Myra said. "I'm philosophical always. You're just noticing." He adjusted his grip on the wheel. "What I mean is a lot of people get a new identity and they spend all their energy making the new name feel real. The name's the easy part. It's the assumptions you have to let go of. The ones about how things work, who deserves what a fair system looks like." "Sounds like you've done this before. I've facilitated it before. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" He glanced at her in the mirror. "I know where I'm going." She turned to the window again. Boston was starting to appear at the edges of things. The specific density of an old city, the texture of accumulated years. Somewhere out there, In the Vorath communication architecture, the redistribution was still processing. It would be for months. You couldn't rush the transfer of 41 trillion credits. It moved at the speed of acknowledgement. She thought about her supervisor who had called her 3 times in the last week and whose calls she had not answered. She thought about the woman in the back seat. She thought about the word justice, which was one of those words that got harder the longer you looked at it. At Logan, Yale pulled to the curb and kept the engine running. Dara was awake again, blinking, running her hands over her face the way people do when they're not sure where they are for a moment. "This is you," Yale said. Dara looked at the terminal, then at Mira. "You got everything? Passport, account access, the emergency contact system." Mira patted the interior pocket of her jacket, where a small transmitter lived. Yale had given it to her. She still wasn't entirely sure what it connected to. "Yeah, good." Dara opened the door and unfolded herself from the car, stretching. She was wearing a gray jacket and a knit hat and looked, in the October airport light, entirely ordinary, like someone who might be going home from a business trip. Yale leaned out the window as she walked around to say something to her. Mira watched in the mirror. She couldn't hear what he said, but Dara stopped, looked at him for a moment, and said something back with a slight smile. Then she looked through the window at Mira, a long look, and nodded once. Mira got out. The air smelled like kerosene in autumn. The terminal doors were glass and light, and through them she could see the ordinary churn of people going somewhere. "I'm sorry," Dara said. "For the things that happened. Don't be," Mira thought about it. "Be something else. Be careful." "Careful isn't my best skill. I know. I read your file." Mira paused. "Try," Dara laughed, the quick, startled laugh of someone who hadn't expected to find anything funny. She picked up her bag and turned toward the terminal. Inside, the airport was a specific kind of loud. The institutional white noise of thousands of people in mid-transition, all suspended between wherever they'd been and wherever they were going. Mira found the gate information on a board and oriented herself. Budapest was 3 terminals over. Lisbon was adjacent. They split at the security line. Mira didn't expect the Hudson News stop. She'd gone past it twice without seeing it. She was focused on the gate, on the clock, on the dry, technical business of getting on a plane, and then she was inside it somehow, browsing without purpose, which was what airports did to you. Made you browse, made you linger. There was a rotating display of novels with big type on the covers, and she was looking at the spines without reading them when someone behind her said, in a voice like expensive upholstery, "Agent Calden." She turned. He was a Vorath, not obviously. That was the thing about the Vorath in their diplomatic and commercial lies and configurations. They'd done something to their transit bodies, some biological recalibration that the treaty documents referred to as integration morphology that made them red, at a glance, as human. Slightly tall, slightly pale, the bioluminescent tissue behind their eyes dimmed to a flicker that you'd mistake for an unusual eye color. This one was wearing a dark coat and holding a novel about beach vacations. Mira's right hand moved. "Please don't," he said pleasantly. "I'm not here to do anything. I'm here on a book tour." He held up the novel. His name was on the cover. She hadn't read his file under this alias, but she'd read 3 others. "Veth Orlin," she said. "In this configuration, I go by Victor." He set the novel back on the rack. "I saw you come in. I thought I'd say hello." Her heart was going fast and she was keeping her face very still. "What do you want?" "Nothing." He spread his hands, which was a gesture he'd learned and executed almost correctly. "The collective's operation is complete. The Echo Protocol redistribution is irreversible. You know this. We know this. The litigation process will take a decade and the outcome is unclear." He tilted his head. "We've moved on. To what? Other things." He picked up another novel, looked at it, put it down. "The thing about your species that took us the longest to model accurately," he said, almost conversationally, "is the weight you place on the present moment. The collective executed this action knowing that the long-term consequences were uncertain. The projected cost to themselves was severe. The redistribution itself solves no structural problem. The systems that concentrate wealth will concentrate again. In 20 years, perhaps 30, the inequity will be comparable to what preceded it." He looked at her, and yet, Mira said. The act mattered regardless. He seemed, in whatever way a Vorath could seem things, genuinely puzzled by this. "The mathematics don't support it, but the act mattered. Every model we've built struggles with this." Mira looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Dara at the rest stop, the look on her face when the map filled up with blue points. Not the satisfaction of victory. Something quieter. The look of someone who had made a thing mean something. That's because your models are missing a variable, she said. Yes, Vethorelin said. That is our conclusion also. We haven't been able to identify it. She almost told him. She could see in the strange dim light of his eyes that he actually wanted to know, that the Vorath genuinely did not understand, and that this was, not a weakness exactly, but a gap. A place where their modeling of humanity had arrived at a wall and stopped. She thought about 11 years and a new passport and a blank page. Figure it out yourself, she said, and walked away. He didn't follow. She found the gate for Lisbon and sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs and stared at the floor for a while. Her gate was 32. All around her, people were doing what people do in airports. Sleeping on bags, arguing softly on phones, scrolling through things, buying bad coffee and drinking it anyway. Two children were playing a game that seemed to involve sliding across the polished floor in socks, and an old man near the window was watching them with the specific happiness of someone who has no stake in the outcome. She thought about the Vorath. She thought about their efficiency and their modeling and their inability to identify the variable. She thought about 340 million people waking up to blue lights on their phones. At gate 31, she could see the Budapest flight boarding. The line was long. She watched it without meaning to. Watched the faces going through, ordinary faces, all of them with somewhere to be. She did not see Dara in the line. She stood up, walked to the edge of the boarding area, scanned the seats, went back toward the corridor. She stopped outside the women's restroom and stood there for a moment. Not quite sure what she was doing, not quite sure what she'd say. A woman came out, not Dara. Then another. Then the Budapest gate agent announced final boarding. Mira stood outside the restroom and thought about variables. She thought about what Yale had said in the car. Not the name. The assumptions. The ideas about how things are supposed to go. She'd spent 11 years in the business of stopping things. Intercepting, containing, preventing. She was very good at it. She did not have a strong model for what happened on the other side of the stop. Through the terminal window, she could see the plane on the tarmac. Boarding bridge still attached. Not yet. She pushed the restroom door open. Dara was sitting on the counter by the sinks, knees pulled to her chest, looking at a point on the floor with an expression Mira recognized, because she'd had it herself in 3 different bathrooms in the last month. The expression of someone whose body has decided it is done moving forward and the rest of the person hasn't caught up yet. Mira stood in the doorway. Dara looked up. Hey, Dara said. Hey. A long pause. I was going to be fine, Dara said. She made a gesture with one hand. I just needed a minute. Okay, it's fine. I'm fine. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. It's just, I've been running the same direction for 4 years and now there's no. She stopped. There's no thing to run toward or away from. It's just forward, and I don't have a good model for that. Mira thought about what the Vorath couldn't identify. You want to know something funny, she said. Not really, but probably yes. A Vorath diplomatic liaison just told me that the thing they can't model about humans is why we do things when the math doesn't support it. Dara looked at her. He couldn't figure out why the redistribution mattered to you when the structural inequity will re-establish itself anyway. He said every model they've built hits a wall. Dara was quiet. Then slowly, what did you tell him? I told him to figure it out himself. Something moved in Dara's face. The tiredness was still there, but there was something below it. The same thing Mira had seen at the rest stop, watching the blue lights spread across a map. It mattered because it happened, Dara said. That's the whole thing. It happened and it was real, and the people who got it. It's real for them right now. Today, whatever happens in 30 years. That's not nothing. She straightened up. That's not nothing. The Budapest final boarding call came over the intercom, muffled through the restroom wall. Mira leaned against the doorframe. I know, she said. They stayed there for a moment, the two of them, in the flat white light of an airport bathroom at the end of something. Then Dara laughed, short and surprised, the same laugh as before, and slid off the counter. Okay, she said. Okay, Mira said. They went out together into the terminal. The boarding bridge for Budapest was still attached, the gate door still open. Dara walked toward it at a pace that was neither hurrying nor delaying. Just walking, the way you walk when you've made a decision and the decision is made. Mira watched her go. At the door, Dara turned once, briefly. A small thing, the kind of nod that means several things at once and doesn't need to be translated. Then she was through. Mira stood in the terminal for a moment and then walked back toward gate 32. Outside the big windows, the sky was going gray at the edges. The Budapest plane was still on the tarmac, the bridge retracting. She watched it start to pull back from the gate, slow, patient. A ground crew member was doing something with an orange wand. The wings were taking on the light. The Lisbon gate agent called rows 1 through 5. Mira reached into her jacket, not the transmitter, the other pocket, the one with the new passport. She opened it and looked at the photo, which looked like her, and wasn't quite, the way all passport photos work. Sergeant First Class Jenna Caro. She thought about the Vorath and their models. She thought about the variable they couldn't find. She thought about 120,000 credits landing in 340 million accounts, and the sound of people in a park outside a rest area in Connecticut who had heard their phones go off all at once and didn't understand it yet. Not fully. Just knew it was something. She thought about a blank page. The Budapest plane was moving now, slow and deliberate, out toward the taxiway. She watched it until it turned the corner and became something smaller, just a shape among shapes. The Lisbon gate called rows 6 through 15. She stood up, picked up her bag, and got in line. Somewhere over the Atlantic, she thought. In the specific quiet of altitude, she might actually sleep. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. She'd been running the same direction for 11 years, and the thing you ran toward had changed shape, and she didn't have a good model for that either. But she had a seat on a plane to Lisbon. She had a blank page, and the variable the Vorath couldn't identify was still there, tucked behind the sternum somewhere, stubborn and dumb and thoroughly human. The knowledge that it matters right now, today, even when the math doesn't support it. Especially then. She handed over her boarding pass. The gate agent scanned it, handed it back, didn't look up. "Have a good flight, Sergeant Caro," she said. "Thank you," Mira said, and stepped through.